Hi there and welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about the topic of happiness, how to be happy by yourself, and my, experience of happiness and learning about it in my own life and what it means for me. And I really believe that the happiness comes from getting to know what I call your big self, uppercase SELF. So that bigger aspect of ourselves. Now, you might say, when I've often talking to people that say, well, I don't want to be by myself. I am not happy when I'm by myself. And I'm not suggesting, you go off and live like a hermit. What I'm really talking about is, accessing and finding the source of your happiness. We all know there's lots of beautiful experiences to be had in life, and that's what we're meant to do, enjoy them. I'm really talking about the source though. If you recognize that the source of your happiness is not outside of yourself, but it's inside, it doesn't really then make sense to go looking for happiness in a relationship. I think it can obviously add and, greatly, improve and bring so much joy to you. And even if you think of it, I know myself, I wouldn't like to be in a relationship where I felt the other person, had put that expectation on me, even if I didn't know that I'm the source of their happiness or responsible for it. I don't think that's fair for any of us to do to each other, friendships, any sort of relationships. It puts a lot of pressure on it. To me, the ideal relationship is where each person, it's taken me many years to learn this, is taking responsibility for their own happiness, their own issues internally, their baggage, their shit basically, and dealing with that so that then, when you go into a relationship, it's not to say you don't have problems and you don't support each other, but you're not projecting or using the other person as a way to work them out. Because that's a lot of pressure. We all have our own things to deal with. And then, it's a whole different ball game when both people, because things will always come up, but when they do come up, you take responsibility and, do what you need to do to process or get help with that. So that's just, I suppose, a starting point in terms of relationships versus being on your own. I really think it's about getting to the root of what is the source of happiness. Now, when I talk about happiness, I'll give you my little definition or what I've come to understand. And I actually wrote a chapter on this, the source of my happiness, in my new book that's coming out in March of next year, The Gifts of Devastation. And I'll just share with you a quote. I used a quote at the beginning of the chapter and it sums it up for me. And I wrote it really as I was learning this. I found it was a very therapeutic really, because I was sort of working through a lot of the issues I wrote about. But basically the quote is by the Persian poet Rumi, and it is, "Maybe you are searching among the branches for what only appears in the roots." And that's sort of an understanding that I came to. To me, like I said, the source of our happiness is not outside of ourselves. I believe, the system and the world we grow up in, this sort of consumerist culture, conditions us to always be going outside of ourselves for happiness, whether it's shopping, buying, relationships, work, alcohol, whatever, all of these things that are, and in and of themselves, they're not, I don't know if to say they're bad, but it's when we search and believe they will give us they definitely will give us a short, a temporary happiness, because nothing that is temporary in its own nature can, surely cannot provide us with a permanent sense of our long-term or an unending form of happiness. And I mean, my God, I've done it, at times when I was very distressed, maybe, and unhappy and in pain in my life, I shopped. When I think of shopped, retail therapy, my God, alcohol I turned to, work, busy going, doing all the time, never stopping, filling every second so I wouldn't have to feel anything. So I was always looking outside of myself. And, I understand that we all go through that phase, but at some point I think, it just becomes exhausting apart from anything else. I had to stop because I was stopped. and I had cancer. So I had to start, looking at different ways of, and understandings. It sort of really I wouldn't say appeared in my life. Once I let go, it's sort of something else took over. So how I describe it is when I say get to know your big self, the way I suppose I can best describe it is the ego self versus the big self, I'll call it, or the true self. So to me, the ego self, which we all have, it's our way of navigating the world and this physical existence. And, it's all about survival, what's in it for me, really, that we're separate from our source, that we're just whatever is physically here, we're separate from each other, we have to compete, there's a sense of lack. That's how I would have experienced life. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I came to know this, I'll call it the true self, the bigger self, and for me that's our infinite selves. And that's the part of us that's wants to create, wants to evolve, wants to experience, wants to grow, wants to have joy, whereas the ego is very restricted and wants to keep everything the same and wants to control because it's coming from a sense of lack. But when you tune into that bigger aspect of yourself, there's no sense of lack. There's just an abundant flow. Now it's a process, and I can drift, I can have, quite, I suppose, what would I say, longer periods of time where I feel very anchored in that place. And I generally do in my life now, but I will come back out because the world pulls us out and, oh my God, into fear and into, you don't have everything you need and you need someone else or something else to make you feel whole and okay. I read somewhere something about, we are agents of the infinite. Or there's another nice line I heard, the timeless communicating to the time bound. So it's like I see it like an umbilical cord, and this is how that higher dimensions of reality experiences the world. This physical world is through us. And that's very, very clear to me now. So, I can sort of say that, that's the source, or, going back to my roots is where happiness is. And the qualities of that, I know when I'm living from that place because I generally feel at peace, calm. I have a sort of an overall sense of contentment, acceptance. I see challenges in a whole different way. Like I genuinely really now don't see problems so much in my life. I think it's a shift in perspective. I do know it's telling me that I've gone out of kilter, out of whack, out of alignment. So there's a whole other sense of feeling that, and it is sort of the theme, but the theme tune to my life, or I try to make it, is that life is happening for me, not to me. And I think that's the difference of coming from the ego self. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong or bad about the ego self. I've heard different people saying, we have to have the ego to navigate this world. And maybe we do. I don't know. I've seen people who seem to live, great teachers and sages and wise people who don't seem to have much of an ego. But I suppose it depends on the world and the life you're living. If you were working in some big corporate cutthroat organization, I'm sure the ego is needed more importantly. But I think that's shifting in the world. It's just the way the earth is evolving. We're moving away from that isn't going to survive or be sustained in the future. So I think that the trick, or not even the trick, but the way is to get to know the true self is where you will, when I say happiness, I suppose it's the word itself might have different connotations for people. Is it going around grinning from ear to ear every day, which is great if you do, but that's not how I see it. I see it as a backdrop of contentment and peace and joy. It's sort of a quiet, but alive sense of happiness that is the backdrop to everything. Even when something goes wrong, or even when you have a difficult day, it's still anchored in this is just part of life. But overall, there's a knowingness that you're okay. And I think that's just, it's changed my life profoundly. I just want to offer you now a few suggestions about how to get more in touch with that aspect, because it's easy to say, we hear it all the time, you need to go inside and it's an inside job and it all sounds, And I know I've talked to people and they're like, but how do you do that? No, it does take, it's not an overnight. I mean, as I said, I had to literally be stopped in my tracks with cancer for a few years to even slow down enough. So I'm not saying I had the wherewithal to do it myself. I didn't. But once I asked for help, that bigger self started to take over when I couldn't. So I think one of the most important things first to start to get to know that aspect of yourself. And when you think of it, if you were, if you were going to go into a relationship or want to be happy with anyone, you'd have to get to know them. And it's the same with yourself. So stillness is, I think, key. You have to get beyond that constant mind stream of thought, because that is very much the ego self. And it's not easy, I know, if, because the world we're in has us sort of so conditioned to go to the mind. So whatever way, again, I'm not going to get into, I'll talk about it again in another video, but whatever way works for you to slow the mind stream. And sometimes it's just bringing your consciousness to it, because you'll probably find there's something you do in your life that you love, and hours will pass and you won't have been, totally engrossed in thinking about some issue or some situation in your life. So whether it's nature or, as I said, maybe doing something creative, maybe it sometimes is to switch off and watch something. I know we're sort of all anti-screens and they're not the most healthy for us, but if you're so stressed and the mind is very active, anything that brings you into a place of feeling safe and that you can slow down and let go might sort of allow you. It's the space between the thoughts. I've heard that. I think it's Wayne Dyer who says that, and he's a lovely meditation around that. So that to me is a lovely idea. It's the space between the gap between the thoughts we're trying to get to. So yeah, that sort of stillness, I think, is key. Another aspect as well, I think of, is the frequency or the energy. So if we understand that higher aspect of ourselves is at a much higher frequency, so it's a much faster moving energy than we as a human being are on this physical plane. And you think of it like a radio station. Obviously, we're at a different frequency as humans, even though we're all evolving and our frequency is rising. It does make it easier to communicate or feel at one or sense that aspect of ourselves by changing our frequency. And I know a lot of people use things like tuning forks. I have some lovely Tibetan bowls and things that I use. It can be music. I love to, when I'm working, I listen to, don't know why I picked 5 to 8 hertz. Someone probably who knows more about this will tell me why. I remember looking it up, but it's quite a high frequency, and I find it just really helps me get into flow and sort of calm and into that place. So that's important. I remember I had a reading with someone, and they were saying that, they do a lot of channeling, that they sort of meet spirit or whatever you want to call it, halfway. So they have to raise their frequency and they come down. And I think that's really nice, just to be conscious of that. And when you do that, that's when you say, well, how do I know it's the self? When you start getting into that slower, just think of the thoughts slowing down and getting into the space between the thoughts, then the intuitions, the ideas, the insights, the instincts, that's how you communicate with yourself. We haven't been taught to trust that or even be aware properly of its existence, other than, being, oh yeah, it happens, but, that's not necessarily the truth. But this is how you communicate, and it's the more you sort of nurture it and cultivate it, it grows, and it's just a beautiful way to be, really at one with that aspect of yourself. The other side of it, I suppose, as well, is some people say, well, you don't have to work at these things. I think you do. I mean, it doesn't have to be really hard work, I suppose. It's really knowing that as a human being on this earth, we carry with us, our wounds and our traumas and our experiences and all these things that we often don't process, and they get lodged inside us. And it's a favorite topic of mine because, again, and I've experienced it, until we do this work and take responsibility, again, as I said, not going outside for the source of our happiness, but within. And to access it, we have to get past the trauma, because that's, sort of blocks us from it and from hearing. So I think, it's so important that whatever it takes, often the stresses and the anxieties and stuff we're feeling, and the discomfort that we don't want to sit with is telling us that we've sort of gone out of alignment. We're no longer aligned to ourselves. We've probably gone back into the ego. We're full of fear. We feel maybe that we're lacking. So that can be seen as something that is something very positive, that it's trying to bring us back in. So I would say that sort of work. And as well, if we're bringing relationships into this as well, like I was saying about being happy yourself first before maybe being in a relationship, is, we can have great friendships and relationships and we can support each other, but we don't want to end up burdening or stretching our friendships and relationships so much if we use them to process all our own traumas. We'll end up people just want to avoid us. We all can be a listening ear and a support and help someone find the answers within themselves, but it shouldn't be, I don't like the word should, but you know what I mean, it's not the way to probably nurture and develop healthy relationships. So that's the work in whatever way you find to do that. But then what happens, and I think I'm nowhere near finished. I don't think we ever get finished, but I've done a certain amount of work, but I'm always, even in recent months, I'm just really blown away by what starts to happen as you do this all the time. It becomes a practice of just reminding yourself, bringing consciousness to it. I'm not this ego limited person. I'm so much more. This whole rhythm starts to take over in your life, a flow. I find the way I work now, I would have been, particularly after my old job, very 9 to 5. I'm not against discipline, but that form of it has to be a set way. I find now I'm often woken up and all I want to do, something just needs to be written down or done. Just, I feel it coming through me. That's the infinite coming through. And then I do it. And then I might the next day, which I have to get bed, I'm working on this, I'll go back and go, okay, now you've got to go back 9 to 5. And the next day I could be exhausted from all I did, and I push myself. And then I realise, no, you really were meant to rest today and you'll come back recharged. So, and you do so much more, and that you have to be rested to sort of get into that creative flow. I call it dancing with life. That's the ideal way. I feel that's, where you get into that sort of, rhythm with life. So there's some suggestions around, to me, how you get to know that aspect of yourself, how that will bring you and help you see, that you are the source of your own happiness. It's the big self. And, what's the alternative? I've often thought, because I didn't, for many years I didn't know about this work, but I think then we end up very limited. We live a very limited life. We're not giving ourselves the chance to grow and evolve and create and experience and have fun and enjoy all the experiences. I'm not saying don't enjoy them. They're fantastic. They get even better when you're coming from that place in yourself. But you don't want to deprive yourself. If we stay stuck to the ego, even within relationships, I know people, I'm not saying everybody has to come together in relationship perfectly whole and happy, and it's different. If you're coming into a relationship and you have the attitude of growing and taking responsibility for yourself, as does the other person, of course, I'm sure you can have wonderful. I know people who've been together for years and years and years since they were very young. So I imagine that they've both chosen a path of growth and they've both chosen a path of taking responsibility. But if you don't, I think at some point, because if you've two people coming in, and I've been there, I'm speaking from experience, where even unconsciously you both have issues that you're projecting or working out through each other. So there's that dysfunction. Maybe one person is projecting onto the other person that you're the source of my happiness, and the other person is, well, I'm a rescuer and I fix people. Maybe that works for a while, but if one person chooses to grow or change and the other doesn't, it likely isn't going to end up lasting. That's my experience. So I don't feel there is another alternative. It's not a very happy one. So in summary, I hope that was helpful for you. I hope you find, that source of happiness within yourself. It's a really enjoyable journey to go on, and I can have days, it's amazing, even the toughest days, but I can be more of an observer, and that just something's coming up and my own resistance or things that I haven't healed and need to be healed. they're still within the backdrop of knowing I'm okay, even though in that moment, you know, like I can get lost in it, I can come back out quite quickly. And the interesting thing is, you know, what can happen is you might find you become a lot more selective about the types of relationships. Now, I mean friendships, romantic, every type of relationship, because once you come to that place of contentment and happiness in yourself, you know, and then boundaries become really important, because boundaries allow you, then you're sort of sending out a signal that I'm looking for people who are on this wavelength and align with where I'm at, because, you know, you deserve that. We all deserve that. So you might find you become more selective, and maybe you don't want to go into a relationship for a while, or maybe you do, or when you're not looking for it, it turns up. I've heard so many people say that, and I've one good friend, I always remember her saying to me years ago, I thought she was amazing, and she was saying she was in a relationship with someone and they'd separated for a while, and she said, you know, but I don't need the relationship, you know, I'll be okay if it doesn't work out. And it has worked out, and, you know, it's been about, yes, I want this relationship, but I don't need it. And it's coming from a whole different place. So I think that's the prize, you know, who knows what lies ahead. But I know it's definitely something beautiful when we choose that happiness and choose to get to know our big selves, as I call it. So thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoy the content of this video, please like and subscribe. You can also subscribe to my mailing list below. I have a free guide I'm giving away, which is called 6 Signs You're Getting a Spiritual Wake-Up Call. And I wrote that because it really came from, you know, it's great to do all this work and get to a certain place, but at the very beginning of it, and the dark night of the soul, and the challenging times are difficult, when I remember I was very lost. So I wanted to write this to sort of help anyone who's maybe going through a difficult time, and even if you can't see it right now, even just to know, even just to acknowledge that as tough as this is, you know, it can be the start of something great, you know. So yeah, I hope you enjoy that if you download it, and, you know, you'll find out more about my content as well below. So as I said, thank you so much for watching, and until the next time, stay well. Okay, bye.